We're about to start our first talk of the day, and we're delighted to have a celebrity with us today from the Tank Museum, Mr. David Fletcher, who will be giving a talk about the M3. I'm sure David would entertain questions towards the end, if there are any.
As long as they're nice and short.
As long as they're nice and short. So look very much forward to learning a lot and hopefully even being entertained by David's speech. So please join me in welcoming David. Thank you.
Well, I was actually told as a bit of a surprise that I would be doing this, and they said, "What do you need to do a tank chat?" And I said, "You need me, and you need a tank. We haven't got a tank, so I'm going to have to manage one on one." And one I've decided to do, because I'm no good at German stuff at all, is the M3, which gives me a bit of scope, but may not interest everybody. This comes as the Lee or the Grant, depending on whether you're talking about the American prototype or the British version of it. But it was powered, and this applies to both of them, by a 9-cylinder Continental radial engine. It's air-cooled, it's a petrol engine, and being a typical American vehicle, it had the engine in the back, a drive shaft running to a 5-speed, using the gearbox at the front. And in most tanks, that got in the way of the turret basket. It didn't apply so much to this tank because the shaft goes below the floor. In any case, the only turret basket is for the 37mm gun, and it's offset to the side. So you can turn the turret without getting in the way of the drive shaft. So that's the basics of the tank. The Continental engine in the back, an engine, by the way, that you had to crank very carefully to start, because it ran into a problem with the oil leaking to the bottom. So you had to turn it over a few times before you risked starting. And then it drove to the front. The reason they had the transmission in the front and they had a front drive stick was probably done out of convenience to begin with. It actually made the tank a lot easier to drive. And I am told, by those that know more than I do, that it doesn't matter too much whether the drive's at the front or the back. The British have always done a system of the engine, the transmission, and everything else set at the back of the tank to a rear drive sprocket. And only the Americans and the Germans from there did this front drive sprocket business, which seems to me to be a bit non-new, but this seems to work quite well. Anyway, that's the mechanical side of it. The M3 had a suspension system invented by a chap called Harry Knox. It used a vertical volute spring system. Now, a volute spring is really rather like a coil spring, except it's made of flat metal. And it means they overlap one another and work like an ordinary spring. That's the way the suspension is. And Knox was the man who not only invented it, he was working for the Rock Island Arsenal, and he actually patented the whole thing to mean that he got some cover. But he was quite an interesting fellow. He developed his own range of cars and trucks during the First World War. He was one of the first people to come up with the idea of an articulated lorry, which the British used later. And he was a much more influential character than we give people credit for. So you've got Knox-type suspension, you've got the idler at the back and the drive sprocket at the front. That was how the whole thing was done. The tank has about 15mm of armour on the front, which is quite good, but as you'll see, it's a riveted construction. Although they did build some tanks with welded construction, the majority that saw service, either as Lees or Grant, were riveted. And the trouble with that is that under impact from anti-tank rounds, rivets will actually fly around inside. And so a pretty fair chance of wounding people who were sitting inside the tank. The Lee has a crew of 7. So you have 2 men serving the 75mm guns, a driver, a radio operator, and then 3 more men in the tank. The British did away with the radio operator And they actually had this idea of making the loader the radio operator, and they put the radio in the turret, which is why the Grant's turret is different to the Lee's. And that's more an accident of history. The other feature you'll find is peculiar to this tank are the two Browning machine guns at the front. They're quite well hit, and the driver fired them, and they were considerably more accurate than most people allow for. But, of course, they'll only fire in the direction the tank's pointing, at least as far as hitting it. So they're quite useful, but I think they did away with them in the end because they were more trouble than they were worth. And it does mean you're using up two machine guns. Otherwise, there's a coaxial machine gun next to the 37. And in the Lee, of course, you've got this cupola on top for the commander, which also has a 30 caliber Browning in it. But it does make the tank very hard. The Americans called their tanks the Iron Cathedral. That was their nickname for it. And you can see why. The Russians called it a grave for 7 brothers. And again, you can see why, but the Russians have a rather more, should we say, rude interest in these things. The British called it Egypt's last hope, simply because it was the last tank in line. They were used by the British at Gazala first, and they used the Grant mainly. And generally speaking, as far as the armament is concerned, the tank was originally designed as an anti-tank and a close support machine. The Americans saw 37mm as the main anti-tank gun, and you had 360-degree rotation on the turret, but the 75 was really a close support designed for the infantry. It made the tank always difficult to adopt a proper hull down position, and the British usually preferred to use the 75 as an anti-tank weapon. They used them against the Germans at Gazala, and it's at Gazala where Rommel is said to have commented that the new American tank knocked great holes in their attacking force. And you can see why, because although the 75 wasn't terribly accurate as an anti-tank gun, the result of it hitting anything was really quite devastating compared with anything we'd fielded up until then. And that was what did it. Later on, they fitted the M3 gun, which is longer and was a more accurate weapon, and didn't require a balance on the muzzle to be stabilised. So that was the armament. The armament's got a reasonable amount of elevation, depression and lateral movement. But it does mean the tank has got to expose most of itself to get. And you can't really take a hull down and get away with it. But that's how it was done. So you've got armour protection, you've got the guns here, and you've got this type of suspension. Now, the Grant has a different turret. Most of you know that anyway. But it was actually developed by a chap called Ted Carr, who had been a member of the British Tank Development Organisation in Britain, had been transferred to Canada to help them build the Ram, and he was an expert at casting, and he was later sent to the United States, and he was the chap who designed the Grant turret. And the reason for the Grant turret shape was largely to get the radio up here in the back, away from the position inside the hull, which you put in the lead. The back of the turret, it was normally operated by the loader, who gave up his duty as a loader for that moment. It had to have two systems in his head at one time, and it comes out a little bit lower. In fact, they reckon that the Lee with that cupola on was about a foot higher than the Grant, and that, although it doesn't sound very much, that mattered in the desert when there was nowhere to hide. you needed to have a tank with a reasonably low silhouette. And the Grant didn't have that here. It stuck up like one of the British officers who was sent to inspect a mock-up of it referred to it as like the Tower of Babel. So I think that's a slight exaggeration. That was the idea, anyway, to come up with such a huge tank. And the British seemed to like it. They were used at Gazala, they were used ultimately at Alamein with Alan Halford. And it was there that they stopped Rommel from making the move into Egypt and the Suez Canal, which is what the Germans were trying to do. And it was really the deployment of the Grants that stopped them. But they were firing from a stationary position quite well. But the Grant was soon superseded by the Sherman. It was only in service for a limited time because it was a bit clumsy. A few of them stayed on as command tanks and that kind of thing, and in the main they were done away with. The only British version that saw a bit of action was the CDL, which had a turret with a high-powered light inside. It was designed to dazzle. The British had this idea that you could dazzle the enemy into submission. And they built this tank. They were only used once, and that was during the Rhine crossing. They were used on the banks to illuminate the river at night, and pick up any frogmen or other unseemly characters who were trying to blow up the bridges. Because they were putting up such a intense light, they got most of the shelling and weren't very popular with the units that were watching. So they shelled out but that's the vehicle. And the funny thing is that although the engine is really an aircraft engine, at least a modified version, it was also extremely reliable. And most of the British comments you'll find normally about the noise it makes when it's going along, especially the suspension makes heck of a bit. But that and the engine are the two things singled out as being more reliable than the British were used to. You could count on these things to start and stop, whereas with the British tank you had to work on it half the night to get it to start. So that was one reason why. But they were also used, apart from the Americans used them in Tunisia and also in the Pacific. Briefly, they were soon replaced by the Sherman. But the other place that they really came into their own, and they were mainly Lees, was in Burns. We usually did away with that cupola on top and went for a ordinary hatch up there. And in Burma they seem to have done extremely well. To give you some idea, they used to have a technique of taking out bunkers of the Japanese. And what they used to do was use high explosives fired from 75 that blast away the vegetation around the bunker. Then they would use armour piercing to knock a few holes in the wall, and then they'd fire smoke in, the idea being that smoke would then trickle out of other orifices which they may have missed, and therefore it gave them something else to fire at. But mainly they were firing anti-personnel shots, because they wanted to kill the Japanese. Quite amazing, there's a story I never heard. The Japanese officer came up behind one on a horse. He climbed out of the saddle onto the engine deck, climbed up the back, put his sword through the tank commander, who then fell dead into the turret, jumped into the turret behind him, killed the gunner in the same way, and was only killed by the loader, who had the presence of mind to get out his revolver and empty it into the Japanese. That was the only way to stop him. But all this carried on while all this fighting was going on. Down here, the driver, the 75mm crew, were all blasting away at the bunker, completely oblivious to what was going on in the rest of the tank. They had no idea that the Japanese had got in there and was taking a toll of the people in the turret. they carried on firing in the normal way. And everyone was looking forward to see what damage they were doing, which is what the idea was. But that was mainly the lead, without the cupola on it, and it made a very effective tank. Funnily enough, the Indian Army, when that deployed in Burma, was using Shermans and Stuarts. The M3s, and they weren't all these, a few Grants were used as well, were in service with a number of regiments, 3rd Carabineers, 25th Dragoons, and that was all that was needed. The Japanese tanks were a load of rubbish. I think it's fair to say that. And certainly one of these could deal with it easily. They had the firepower to do it. But mainly, although there was a general consensus of opinion that tanks were not ideally suited to the jungle, they've certainly made a name for themselves, fighting in the most amazing conditions. And that's how they worked, using the M75. And that really just about sums it up, I think, for the whole thing. 25th Dragoons was the first regiment to take the Lees into Burma, and the first regiment to see action. But apart from that, those regiments were the ones that dominated what was going on in that part of the world, and knocked spots off the Japanese easily. But there's the tank boy, transmission in the front, obviously. They used a controlled differential steering system, the three-track system, which worked fairly well, but was crewed by British standards. But then the British soon got used to it, and you'll find if you talk to them that there are British people who don't even consider the Grant an American tank. But it is really, because it's based on the M3, it's just a British turret fitted to it. Not really a tank. Quite an effective one. But they're a good solid idea, but they were eclipsed completely by the Shermans. Thanks very much.
The thing I question myself is, like you said, they called it a cathedral, but it's a very big tank, it's a big target. So how come it sticked around so long? Because look at it, it's massive.
They had nothing else. I mean, they say, and I don't frankly believe this, they say that they couldn't develop the Sherman any quicker because they didn't have the facility to produce a turret ring big enough to mount the 75 in the turret. No, I don't believe that, because the M6 medium tank, or heavy tank, had a fairly large turret ring anyway, and they'd already produced that, so they could certainly do it. I don't know why they took so long. But this thing was only in service for about 9 months, something like that, and it was eclipsed by the Sherman coming on after. So it wasn't that long, but they were big, no doubt about it, and difficult tanks. Select a proper hull down position. You can't hide it. You can hear it coming from miles away. Anybody got any questions?
They have very long questions, that's why they are not
I think so.
But it used also a lot of equipment, or because look at the metal that goes in there, so they needed a lot of material to build it. If you look at other tanks.
Before you all go, can I just say something? David will mind me saying this, so I'm going to say it. You're looking at one of the original YouTubers here. He's up there with Sophie Line and Rita the Gamer and all the rest. And people pay serious money to listen to David talk, so David, thanks. On the other. There is an opportunity now to drive the models.
Ooh.